Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the Rocky Mountain Cyberspace Symposium. I am Rich Genoso. I'll be your Master of Ceremonies again today, and we have a great lineup for you. As I mentioned yesterday in the opening remarks, one of the things that we're going to have is kind of a sub-theme here on Power of Convergence this year is how that plays out with our newest service, the U.S. Space Force. And our first keynote speaker this morning is especially well positioned to share some information with us on that topic. Miss Erin Miller is the Executive Director of the Space Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or Space ISAC, based right here in Colorado Springs. Before that position, she was the Director for the Center of Technology, Research, and Commercialization, and she was also a key player in the stand-up of Air Force CyberWorks up at the United States Air Force Academy, also right here in the Springs. So a wide background, very applicable to our topics here today, and we're all looking forward to hearing her speak. So without any further ado, let me turn over the podium and the stream to her, virtual podium, and we can hear her comments this morning. Ma'am, over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for those kind remarks, and very pleased to be here and honored that you would consider me as a keynote speaker at your event. I hope everyone's been enjoying the symposium so far. We're having a wonderful blustery day in Colorado, which is wonderful. It's a great backdrop, this storm is, for this discussion that we're about to have on cybersecurity for space. So I want to get started. As was mentioned, I'm Erin Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the Space ISAC. Space ISAC is the Space Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and we are operated by the National Cybersecurity Center. Many of you might be familiar with that organization, headquartered in Colorado Springs as well, and located off of North Nevada. The Space ISAC does have some direct correlation with our theme for today, requirements and recommendations. But I also wanted to just hit on some of my background, as well as was mentioned that previously I was working at the Air Force CyberWorks program to support the launch of that, and also the Catalyst Accelerator, the first space accelerator for the Air Force at the time when it was launched. And both of those directly tied into development of requirements and recommendations and expediting the process in order to get access to those. So I'm very excited about the opportunities for Space ISAC to be able to use information sharing to expedite that process as well, to drive correct requirements that are needed to protect our security for space. So Space ISAC's mission is shown here for you. We are in existence to facilitate collaboration across the global space industry to enhance our ability to prepare for and respond to vulnerabilities, incidents, and threats. We disseminate timely and actionable information among our member entities. And very important to note that we serve as the primary communications channel for the sector with respect to this information. The space community has not had a space dedicated ISAC until the time that Space ISAC was launched. And so all of the communications about threats and vulnerabilities can come through the Space ISAC to reach the global space sector, as the space sector is not defined as just the US based companies or the US based economy. It is the global space economy. For those of you who may not be familiar with ISACs, ISACs exist to collect, analyze, and disseminate actionable threat information to their members. And they usually exist to address sector-wide communications. So there are many other sectors out there. Space obviously is not the only one. We're the 30th ISAC to be stood up. There's the IT, information technology ISAC. There's also the communications ISAC, automotive, aviation, national defense, communications. There's so many other adjacent sectors to space that already have ISACs. But the one that wakes up every day thinking about threats to space is the Space ISAC. So we came to exist as a result of the S&T Partnership Forum making a public announcement through the White House in 2019. The public and private sector silos that had formed over time needed to be broken down. And so the study that they conducted showed that one of the best ways to break down those silos between the public and private sector was to leverage the ISAC model. And so we had a public announcement from the White House through the NASA CIO and support from Air Force Space Command, now U.S. Space Force, and NRO. And as it was mentioned, Space ISAC is promoting sector-wide awareness. You can find out more about ISACs on the National Council of ISACs website. We are a member of that organization as well. And Space ISAC serves as an all threats security information source for the public and private sector. So it's all threats, all hazards, not just restricted to cybersecurity. I want to also mention that the majority of the ISACs were launched in 1998. When the PPD 63 came out, there were several sectors that were designated as critical infrastructure at that time. And so this legacy of ISACs actually has been around for a while now, since 1998. So after our launch, oops, I skipped, hold on. So after our launch, then shortly thereafter, in September of 2020, then the administration at the time made a pivotal decision to release the Space Policy Directive 5. Space Policy Directive 5 is the first directive to ever call for cybersecurity for space. So Space ISAC immediately responded by creating an SPD-5 task force. And because our space systems are reliant on information systems and networks from design, conceptualization through launch and flight operations, then it's been critical that we figure out how to really implement SPD-5. So this SPD-5 task force within the Space ISAC is taking on this activity to implement the directive for the global space community. And we have leaders from our membership base, Lockheed Martin, the Aerospace Corporation, and Kratos Defense that are leading this task force. MITRE Corporation, Parsons, and many others are also involved. We did have our meeting in March most recently, and we're having continued discussions with ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, and NIST, as well as CCSDS, which is an international standard setting body, to discuss how they could help us to use the results of our analysis to fill gaps in standards that exist now. That's the current trajectory for this SPD-5 task force, is to help fill those gaps, because we know there's already standards that are out there that will help implement SPD-5, but there may be gaps. So once we conduct our analysis here over the next month or two, then we'll have a report on that from the Space ISAC. So threats to space can come from a variety of sources. And the Space Foundation has reported that by 2040, the global space economy will be worth $1 trillion. And 80% of that comes from commercial space. So with the numerous companies that are taking advantage of the low barriers to entry to access the space economy, and more space capable nations, that we are facing an increasing threat landscape. And we're seeing that humans on Earth today are dependent upon space assets for our supply chain, our food supply chain specifically. Walmart's, post offices all use space assets, travel, tourism, jobs. You know, the list is pretty extensive. It's impacting every aspect of our daily lives. And space is not yet designated as critical infrastructure by DHS or the US government. So the Space ISAC standing up actually signals a major milestone in getting to that place where space might be designated as critical infrastructure, since most ISACs are in direct alignment with a designated critical infrastructure. We're seeing the proliferation of LEO and other mega constellations that cross nation state boundaries, increasing the attack vectors, and LEO constellations being used for 5G and maybe eventually 6G. So when Space ISAC was launched in 2019, much of this was projected, and now it's coming to fruition. And we're seeing that it's very much needed that we have a way to share information on threats and vulnerabilities to space on a daily basis. We opened general membership for Space ISAC in May of 2020, and we were able to declare our initial operating capability for Space ISAC in just a couple weeks ago. We publicly declared it, but we had achieved IOC about 2 months before that. So in December through January, when we launched our threat intel platform, then we had officially achieved our IOC for the Space ISAC. And this allows for that rapid information sharing. So to be clear on why an ISAC was chosen to protect and share information about threats and vulnerabilities to space, I want to do a little bit of reflection on the past 20 years and what we learned from having ISACs and the importance of convergence. So all of the ISACs are converging daily on threats and vulnerabilities. In particular, most of them are focused on cybersecurity threats. And what they have proven out by being in business and doing this is that there is an economic interest, a social interest, and public relations interest, as well as access to exchange of information that occur regularly in the ISAC model. The economic interests are pretty profound because if you are a company that is a member of an ISAC, then it's been shown that you would have to have $1 billion worth of annual revenue in order to produce the type of information that comes from an ISAC. And I would imagine even if you did have $1 billion worth of annual revenue, it would be hard to gain access to the cross-sector information that's available through the National Council of ISACs. And with the growing number of threats and incidents, then ISACs are a way for everyone who's in their core industry to be able to strengthen their defense. The social interests of being part of an ISAC come from when a company is able to gain access to a threat or a vulnerability. For example, the most recent Microsoft Exchange server vulnerability that was released, that impacts enterprise-wide, and this can truly benefit large corporations and can impact a large portion of sectors. If they really dig deep and figure out, how many people are truly impacted by a specific vulnerability, then it can be pretty widespread. And we've seen that recently with SolarWinds as well. So the social interest really is a strong argument to select the ISAC model. The public relations aspect, of course, it's really important to be able to explain that you are in the loop and showcase that you have the latest and greatest information on incidents and vulnerabilities. And then sharing information on a regular basis in a face-to-face format when possible, or also virtually, allows for excess cooperation that might not normally occur across the supply chain and across the sector. So these results that I just went through actually came from a study that ENISA conducted, which is a European research group. So across the globe, ISACs have been studied for the past 20 years, and we're able to see why an ISAC was chosen for protecting the space, helping to raise the security posture of the space community. So here I have a few talking points for you on the space ISAC. So what are we doing? What is our current state and where are we going is what I'm going to share with you now. So Space ISAC is taking a multi-decade approach to commercial, international, and government collaboration. As I mentioned earlier, the National Cybersecurity Center operates the Space ISAC, and we are particularly interested in including the commercial and international community in our entirety of our collaboration. The Space ISAC members are leaders in the security for space community. So we're not recreating anything. We're taking the existing power base, the existing global space economy, and giving them access to a platform where they can share information in a timely manner. And we have companies that represent across defense, IC, commercial, and international critical infrastructure, because a lot of US national security actually depends on international critical infrastructure when it comes to space. Space ISAC is not a political organization. We're operationally focused. We are solving problems for analysts and operators and empowering access to information for managers and executives across the globe. We are a 501c6, so we could actually lobby if we chose to, but that's not the intent of the Space ISAC. That's part of why it is headquartered in Colorado Springs as opposed to DC, for example. So security for space is important to protect humanity and is raising the posture. We are raising the posture of the entire sector. As we've discussed, then the value of space to humans on Earth is prevalent in our economy and all aspects of our daily life. So how is Space ISAC looking at protecting space or securing the space sector? We're looking at it through this public view of our priority intelligence requirements. So priority intelligence requirements documentation is for Space ISAC members only. This view shows you that we are sharing threats and vulnerabilities around operations technology, which includes the supply chain, business systems, which also includes supply chain, and then the mission itself is the most important area where we are sharing information and having live discussions where members are talking about the threats that are directly impacting our space systems. So under mission, we have cybersecurity, development and production, critical infrastructure protection, launch landing and recovery, space environment, weather and hazards, and space system operations. We are all threats, all hazards. And those left two, those are just, a monstrosity supply chain matter. So it's quite a big undertaking and a large scope that we can cover. The image here shows you the public-private sector construct for the Space ISAC. So on the left-hand side, you can see how we break down the space sector. We have members that represent in each of these areas: launch, communications, space vehicles, space systems engineering, cybersecurity, and cloud and data processing. And we were especially including cloud and data processing because of the movement from ground stations, traditional ground stations, to ground stations in the cloud. And the implications of an IT threat to the space community can look vastly different than an IT threat that just impacts a terrestrial network. On the right-hand side, you can see our intended partnerships include a wide variety of government, US government entities, and we're actively working to form collaborations with each of them. The DHS CISA, that office typically charters or signs formal information sharing agreements with all ISACs. So we already have that in place, and that allows us to form other arrangements and share bidirectionally with other government agencies. At the bottom, I've noted that we are intending to include the European Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, and the German Aerospace Center in our collaborations, and more. That's just the first priority 3. We're already in discussions with them about formal information sharing. So the byproduct of this public-private sector construct is that we're able to use our threat intel sharing portal, information sharing portal, to produce alerts. We're also actively seeking to produce recommendations and standards for the global space community. Here you can see the founding board members of the Space ISAC and our role in the National Council of ISACs. We may be a little bit different than some of the other ISACs because we have that global footprint. SES is headquartered in Luxembourg. They're on the board of the Space ISAC. And we also have universities, FFRDCs, and UARCs that are part of our, or FFRDC operators, I should say, that are all part of the Space ISAC board. So Aerospace Corporation, MITRE Corporation, Space Dynamics Lab, and Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, as well as UCCS and Purdue have pivotal roles in the success of this organization. Now, we're on our way to having about 30 members of the Space ISAC, and it hasn't even been a year since our membership has been open. So you can see here those companies that have joined as general members, and we have quite a wide variety here as well. KSAT is headquartered in Norway, and we have companies here that, if you don't recognize their name, it might be because they're small and they're just breaking their way into the industry. When we set up the membership for the Space ISAC, our intent was to allow for there not to be a financial barrier for small companies that are startups, perhaps even under $3 million of annual revenue, to be able to access the Space ISAC. So if you're in an accelerator or you're in part of a startup small business mentorship program, then you might be the right type of company that should be taking advantage of that extremely low rate to gain access to threat intel sharing in the Space ISAC. So when we look at space systems then and we talk about them, sometimes people ask, what is a space system anyway? What are you really talking about? What all does that include? And with our definition of a space system, then we are including the ground segment, the space segment, and the user segment, as well as the link. And you could even say that infrastructure that supports all of those is also its own segment. And we're seeing that increasingly there is earthbound resilience on these space systems. We use them in our commodity navigation, in energy resilience, transportation services, national defense, and disaster warning, and even more. So space is impacting almost every aspect of our daily lives. In this OB1 type slide, you can see that Space ISAC addresses the terrestrial network, but it also extends into the space layer network. And threats to terrestrial and space layer network are vast, and we must consider vectors from all segments of space. So the space, ground, user, link, and infrastructure, all as a segment, are depicted in this OB1 diagram. Space assets communicate with our ground systems. Space is an attack vector to our earthbound systems and vice versa. So on this slide, you can also see that we're depicting a rogue ground system, and we're seeing that increasingly there's access and integration with existing space assets that increase our exposure. And it is much easier than it has been previously possible for malicious actors to get access to space. Through the space-based external attack that's represented here, then you can see that there's rapidly changing space vehicle technology that is being introduced. And this is a vector for space vehicle to vehicle attacks. So some critical trends to identify as we move forward is the commercial prevalence of dependency on the space domain, as well as the security boundaries that are less defined now, and the fact that the space community is using commodity hardware and software. Another critical trend to note is that supply chains plural, are complex. We're seeing increased integration, which equals an increased attack surface, and that is a defender's dilemma. So what we learned from IoT, cloud, and OT can be utilized here as the global space community continues to increase and our interdependencies continue to increase. And it's important to note that space systems do represent two-way dependencies with our everyday infrastructure. So we're asking the question now in the Space ISAC, in order to address this, how do we share across sectors so that we can provide the most benefit to raise the security posture of the global space community? We must share across sectors. So for our IT, auto, aviation, national defense, communications, and all other sectors that have interplay with the space community, then we're posing the question to them: what information do your sectors need? What information can they share with us? And how can we enable each other? How do we leverage what we've learned prior? And how can organizations that are members of other ISACs interact with the Space ISAC? One of the great platforms that's been established to excel this communication and collaboration is DHS's working group that they stood up. It's called the Space Systems Critical Infrastructure Working Group. So that will be assisting quite a bit with this interplay across different sectors. So where we're at today with the Space ISAC is we've achieved some major milestones where we've been able to declare our initial operating capability, and we made our public announcement in February. And with that, we launched an unclassified threat intel sharing platform. We also have vetting that's in place for all new members that join Space ISAC to increase the trust in the community, to ensure that no one is joining that has participated in nefarious activities. We also actively conduct workshops and webinars monthly now in 2021. You can see on our website our workshops and webinars. We're projecting that we'll have a Value of Space Summit. That's primary objective is to discuss how humans are dependent on space assets, and we'll run that in October 2021. And we conduct an annual government forum. The first one was in January 2020, and it helps to launch the Space Systems Critical Infrastructure Working Group, and which now exists as of February 2021. So we're making great strides. We're also actively seeking partnerships that will be formed across U.S. Space Command, DHS, CISA, OSD, Air Force Research Lab. And I mentioned earlier that we're working in our SPD5 task force with CCSDS, ANSI, NIST, and more. And all of our members have access to these partnerships. Our 6 priority partnerships that we've set out, because if you don't have priorities, then everything's important, and then nothing's important. So we have NASA, NSA, US Space Command, German Aerospace Center, Department of Space, State, and NRO as our 6 priority formal information sharing partnerships to get underway in 2021. So the other major milestone that we've achieved is establishing task forces and working groups that meet regularly. We have an information sharing working group that meets weekly, small satellite owners and operators community of interest that meets monthly, analyst working group that shares threats and vulnerabilities at the analyst level, threat working groups that we're intending to launch later this year, our Space Policy Directive 5 task force, a blockchain community of interest, also an exercise task force, and a CMMC task force. So we're always looking for leaders from the space community that want to get involved in these, and we have others we'd like to launch: the Supply Chain Risk Management Working Group, a Workforce Community of Interest, and a Research and Technology Community of Interest. And all of these groups exist to increase the security posture for global space. And finally, we're tracking towards launching our Space ISAC headquarters with a Space Cyber Watch Center and a Cyber Vulnerability Lab in 2022. And our headquarters will be in the UCCS Cybersecurity building. There's 7,000 square feet for Space ISAC's headquarters in that building, co-located with the National Cybersecurity Center, Exponential Impact, and UCCS's cybersecurity programs for students and faculty. So to break down a little bit more detail on the analyst working group that I talked about, the topics that they cover in that working group monthly are our functional areas under our priority intelligence requirements: cybersecurity, development and production, supply chain and finance, critical infrastructure protection, launch, landing and recovery, space environment, weather and hazards, and space system operations. And our stated threat sharing objectives are that we will share information about the impacts of threats on space systems, and that we're going to create an environment that enhances sharing. Also, we will be sharing with the supply chain down to small and startup companies. This is extremely important and a benefit of ISACs that they're capable of sharing that far. We also share commercial and internationally, and we include the global space sector in everything that we're doing. We're also expanding to have deeper dive sessions, as I mentioned, called threat working groups. And we're anticipating that can happen in 2021. So finally here, I want to end on the core values of the Space Information Sharing and Analysis Center. They are intelligence, resilience, and trust. And these are all 3 required to run an effective ISAC and have an active sharing membership. So intelligence allows us to build awareness. We offer alerts, indicators, member insights, and threat assessments, as well as analysis to all of our members regularly. We also are increasing resilience for the community by giving access to workshops, working groups, case studies, exercises, and playbooks. And then trust, when we come together and we're able to interact with each other and know who each other is, then we're more likely to want to share with one another. So we offer lots of opportunities to do that, and also build trust into our processes and procedures. Best example I have is how we vet our members to ensure that no one is joining who might have nefarious activities in mind. So all of this exists to protect the sharing of critical information and best practices among the Space ISAC members. And with that, I'd like to land on my question slide here so that you can reach out to me directly if you're interested, or to Carrie Hardy, our membership and marketing manager, and open to discussions about partnership, collaboration, membership, anything. So feel free to reach out, and now we can turn to Q&A.
Thanks, ma'am. Just a reminder for the audience, you'll find an Ask button at the bottom of your web viewer there. Just go ahead and press that, enter your question in the space, and our staff will get those right up to Ms. Miller. Thank you.
So the first question looks like a question about key concerns that are related to information sharing. There are barriers to information sharing among the federal, state, local, and private sector entities. And the question is, what do you see as the highest priority among such barriers, and how does Space ISAC attempt to break down such barriers? Going into standing up the Space ISAC, we were aware that this was an issue. Although it's extremely important to share information, it's also hard. And one of the ways to make it easier is to run exercises. So we established our exercise task force, and we ran an exercise last year at the executive level. It was an exercise tabletop run at AIAA Ascend. And the goal there was to talk key stakeholders through the activity of making the decision of joining an ISAC, and then taking the critical step of being willing to share into the ISAC. So as we turned the pressure up on the scenario in the exercise, we saw that there is a strong possibility that with situations that are taking place every day right now on a regular basis, there are many companies that are attacked daily and incidents of compromise identified. The more evident it became to the company, then the more likely they were willing to share, because they knew that others would benefit from their sharing and they would directly benefit from their sharing. The other way that we're continuing to address this is by running another exercise this year. So we'll continue to do this and build on the one before. And the one that we're looking at this year involves a very specific threat that is known, and it's not completely understood how to respond to that type of threat. If you are a space satellite constellation owner or operator, then you're going to encounter this type of scenario that will be in this exercise at some point in time, and it's going to be important for companies to know how to respond and to leverage the ISAC's resources. So that's another way that we're approaching that, is to be able to walk through the scenario before it actually occurs in an ideal manner. Okay, so next question. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat.
Might be, ma'am, that might be all the questions that we've got so far from the audience at this point.
Okay.
I think if you want to do a little bit of wrap, if we see one else pop in, we can segue to that. Otherwise, I think we're good to go.
Okay, great. Well, I really appreciate all of your time and attention today, and your support for cybersecurity for space. And as I mentioned, I've got an open door through my email. Please feel free to drop me a message, and look forward to the continued discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, ma'am. We appreciate you taking your time with us today. I know it's busy over there at the ISAC, and you clearly have a lot of things that are going on right now. So we really appreciate you giving us your time this morning. We will be sending you one of our custom embossed chapter notebooks as a thank you and a memento of your time with us today. And so we look forward to having you maybe in some future shows, and certainly we will welcome that aspect as we see the Space Force kind of build out here. So it's an exciting time. So thanks again. Okay,
Yeah,
folks. We'll be taking a bit of a break right now. I encourage you all to visit the next Tech Talk at 9:30. Make sure also that you go through the virtual exhibit floor, support our sponsors and exhibitors. And as a reminder, we're doing a drawing at the end of each day for those folks that have interacted with all of the booths. So start going around, make sure you poke around in those booths, say hi to the folks that are there, and at the end of the day, if you've hit all the booths, we will get you in that raffle for the iPad. So more to follow on that. After that, we'll be right back here at 10:15 for our first panel of the day, just down one row on your agenda. So enjoy your time, and I will see you back here in just about an hour.